G'day, athletes. Welcome to the Kilted Athlete Podcast. My name is Keith and I'm your host. It is Friday again, time to put out another episode. And as promised, this one is going to be about weight training. The last couple of episodes I put out have been about running, and I did promise that this one will be about weight training, just to even it up a bit, just to for the non-runners out there, so they're not getting constantly um, pounded with running episodes. This one is about weight training and specifically like how to make your sets a little bit tougher, how to get that little bit extra, a few techniques about how to get that little bit extra out of your sets. But before we start, you know what I'm about to say. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, please do so. Please hit that subscribe button. Please share this with your friends and get me a few more followers, get me a few more people listening, all that stuff. I like seeing those kind of graphs go up on my episodes, on my podcasts, and all that kind of stuff. I like seeing the metrics. It kind of inspires me a bit, when I see that someone else has subscribed to my podcast, a new person has listened, or when the graphs go up. I like to see it. So help me out there. It only takes a couple of seconds to subscribe if you haven't already. So, as I said, this episode is about how to get that little bit extra out of your set. Um, so, when we do a set, I've mentioned in previous podcasts, you want to be like really challenging that muscle. You really want to be taking that set to the wire, so the muscle's like really struggling those last couple of reps. And there's a couple of kind of techniques. There's probably plenty of techniques, but a couple or three actually that I tend to use quite a bit, and I'm going to explain these. Now, when you're taking things to the wire, there's a few factors you really need to consider, and the main factor you need to consider is safety. So, if you're maxed out on heavy squat, like sometimes the decision whether to do another rep in that set um, comes down to safety. So you may be able to do another rep, but then will doing another rep put you at risk of hurting yourself, injuring yourself. Like heavy barbell exercises, especially, are things you really need to factor in. Not so much a case with pin-loaded machines, um, but yeah, definitely. It comes down to that decision: do I do another rep and potentially injure myself, just to get that little bit extra? So there's a few little tips here, three main tips that I kind of want to talk to you about today. So the three techniques I want to talk about, and these are the three main ones I use if I want to get that bit extra out of my set, are drop sets, long length partials, and and pausing. And there's different situations where you'd use each variation, each technique, and I'll kind of explain in this episode when I would use them, and what particular exercises each of these techniques is good for. So let's talk about drop sets to start with. So a drop set is essentially when you are kind of starting off with a heavier weight, and then when you're maxed out and can't do any more reps at that weight, instead of ending the set, you immediately pick up a lighter weight and keep going. And you might do this 3 or 4 times. So you might like continuously go down lower 3 or 4 times until you physically can't do anymore. It's quite can be quite amusing when you do this because you can end up with at the end of your drop set with quite a light weight and looking like you're really struggling on a light weight. So these drop sets are particularly effective when you're using a pin loaded machine or dumbbells. Um, Not particularly effective when you're using a barbell exercise, because essentially a barbell takes a bit of time to unload and reload. So the key to the drop set is you're immediately going to the next weight down. There's no pause in between. So if you have a big long rack of dumbbells, you can put one set down and immediately pick up the next one and continue with the set. Um, if you have a pin loaded machine, you or possibly a spotter can easily change the weight of the pin loaded machine. Um, but if you have a barbell, obviously that's going to take a bit of time to put more weights on the barbell. So it's not particularly effective for barbell loaded exercises, for example, bench press or squats, because of that reason, because of the time taken to change the weight. So things like, for example, um, cable tricep press downs, um, dare I say bicep curls. If you're if you're a regular listener to this podcast, you would know how I feel about bicep curls. It's not a particularly up high on my list of essential exercises, but um, I bicep curls is something you could use drop sets for effectively. Anything pin loaded, especially if you have a spotter there that can easily like change the weight of, change the position of that pin. Um, yeah, so any of those kind of things, particularly isolation exercises um, rather than compound exercises. So the way it would work, if you have a a rack of dumbbells, and I'm going to mention the bicep curls again, even though it's not one of high up on my you know list of important exercises. But to say, for example, you were doing bicep curls and you picked up a bigger dumbbell, use them until you can't do anymore, immediately put them down and without any rest. And this is like the essential thing. Zero rest. You go straight to the next weight down, the next lowest weight, and keep going. And you might do this 2 or 3 times. At the end of it, you've got a relatively low weight, but you're burning. Like you're doing it tough. Um, quite often someone will walk into the gym when you're doing that really low weight, and there you are struggling to do a really low weight, so it can look quite amusing, but yeah, definitely effective. You can do that with tricep press downs. It's always, better to have a spotter there, a mate there that can change that pin instantly. So, because obviously that's going to be quicker than you changing the pin yourself. So the idea then, if you were doing tricep press downs, would be to do as many as you can at the weight, and as soon as you can't do any more, you sort of quickly put that weight plate down, and your mate kind of puts it to the next weight down, and you continue. So you're really slimming down that like rest time until it's almost zero rest, and you just keep going. The leg extension is another good one. You could use that for. Um, Once again, if you have a mate there to change that pin instead of you doing it yourself, that's even more ideal. So generally, I would do that on the last set for this for for this particular exercise. So I wouldn't generally do a drop set on every set. Say, for example, if I'm doing 3 sets, I would only do the drop set on the third set, not on every set. But you do you if you want to do every set as a drop set. I find it more effective if I do the drop set on the last set, um, and then you're kind of like finishing off. You're kind of leaving nothing in the tank basically, and it's it's relatively safe, because you're not doing big compound exercises with this. They're usually isolation. So your tricep press down, you're isolating the tricep. Your leg extension, you're isolating the quadricep. Um, so the reason you wouldn't do this, I wouldn't suggest doing this for compound exercises, is firstly, as I mentioned, it takes a long time to change barbell plates. Not a long time, but even if you've got spotters there to like act as a pit crew and change it over quickly, it still takes a pause. And if you're pausing, for any longer than a second, like you that set's over. You don't want to rest between reps in your set, so you don't want to put that barbell down for the period of time it's going to take your spotters to change the plate. So that's the first thing. Um, the second thing is safety essentially. Um, if you've squatted till you can't squat anymore, and then you kind of take a bit of weight off that and then keep going again. There's you're fatigued at the end of the original weight you're lifting, so there's a bit of a safety concern there to continue on to lift slightly less weight. So yeah, machines is good for, dumbbells is good for. I would not recommend doing your big barbell lifts using drop sets. So yeah, not your squats, not your barbell squats, not your bench press. But there kind of is a hack there that's not technically a drop set, which I, I'm going to kind of put it in this drop set category, but it's not technically a drop set, where you could finish your set and go straight into a relevant body weight exercise. For example, a push-up uses the same method, same muscles as a bench press. So if you maxed yourself out on your bench press and then roll straight off the rack, obviously rack the bar first, but roll straight off the bench there and continue doing push-ups until you couldn't do any more. There's less of a safety factor there, and the continuity, like there's really no pause. You rack the barbell and you've gone straight into that push-up. So you roll straight on the floor and just keep doing push-ups. So that's essentially going to achieve the same thing as a drop set. Likewise, if you were to do barbell back squats and you were fatigued, couldn't lift any more of that weight, you rack that barbell straight away and go into like a body weight squat or a Bulgarian split squat, something where you're not actually using a weight. So you're kind of finishing off that process until fatigue, but you haven't got the big barbell there that's going to potentially um, cause an injury. So yeah, it's not technically a drop set, but similar principle. You're just going straight into the body weight version of that exercise. And really, like if you're rolling off a bench press, once you've racked that barbell, obviously, and you're rolling straight on the floor and doing you know, doing push-ups until you can't do any more. There's obviously less danger of injury when can't do any more push-ups than if you can't do any more bench presses. Um, and the other thing is the time. Once again, obviously, taking a bit more weight off a barbell is going to take time. So, but once you rack it, just go straight into that exercise, kind of like brings that rest time to almost zero, which is what you're looking for in a drop set. So, yeah, drop sets or um, the alternate, you know, I don't know if there's actually a name for it. I didn't invent that, but I've seen other people at the gym doing it. Not sure if there's a name for it, but going straight into relevant bodyweight exercise, similar principle. So the key points for this is, really minimizing that rest time in between your weights. Like you want that to be almost zero. You want to put the original weight down, go straight into the next weight with almost zero pause in between. So you really need to streamline that method of changing over. And look, once again, I would suggest doing that at the on your last set of your that particular exercise. So I generally wouldn't do drop sets for every set of that exercise, just the last one. And yeah, once again, dumbbells or pin loaded machines are ideal for this. Barbells, not quite so ideal, but use the alternative I suggested if your barbell compound exercises. Um, it's just, you just need to remember that they need to be like the relevant body weight exercise of what you've just done. So if you've done a bench press, the relevant body weight exercise is a push up. If you've done a barbell squat, the relevant body weight exercise is a body weight squat. So you're still fatiguing the same muscles. Now, the second technique I want to talk about is called long length partials. So this is essentially doing like, I would suggest the last few, the last 2 or 3 reps of your set. Now, you've probably heard me before talk about how important the full range of motion is for a rep, and I'm going to talk about the infamous bicep curl again. And the reason I talk about bicep curl a lot is not because it's a particularly high up on my list of important exercises. There's a lot more exercises that will achieve a lot more result than just sitting there spending an hour in a gym doing bicep curls. But the reason I talk about curls a lot is because it's easy to explain the concept. I kind of use it as everyone knows what a bicep curl looks like, so it's easy to. The elbow is a hinge joint, so it's easy to talk about range of motion and things like that I'm trying to describe. People can kind of picture that bicep curl. So when I talk about range of motion, if you're doing a bicep curl, that the the bicep operates the elbow muscle. So if you think of when your elbow is fully contracted, fully bent, that's one end of the range of motion, the short end, and then when it's fully extended, that's the long end of the bicep curl. So it's like that's your range of motion. And I've often talked about how important the full range of motion of an exercise is. So this kind of contradicts this a little bit, and I'll explain when to do that and and why I'm kind of contradicting myself here a bit. So range of motion is important when you're doing any weights exercise. You don't want to be always doing half reps. But there are certain times when they can be of benefit and certain types of half reps. So you may kind of have picked up that I've said long length partials, not just partials. So here's the difference. So if we're doing that bicep curl, and if you imagine halfway between that range of motion, when your elbow is about 90 degrees angle, okay, and so you're splitting that rep in half from the fully bent position to that 90-degree position. That's the short length partial. That's kind of like the easiest part of the rep. So the short length partial is, and you kind of see when people are doing partials, they quite often like will be doing the short length partial because it's easier. The long length partial. So if you think of like from the 90-degree angle until when your arm is fully extended, that's your long length partial. It's a bit of a tongue twister, long length partial. Try saying that fast 10 times. So you're kind of thinking of doing the exercise in the stretch position or the long length position of the exercise. So if you're going from completely straight to that 90-degree angle, you're using a longer half of that exercise, which is the harder part. So when do you use this? As I've mentioned in many podcasts, and I've been mentioning in this one, range of motion is important. So for most of your reps, you want to be doing the full range of motion. If you're not doing the full range of motion, you're kind of generating this weakness in part of your range. But once again, on your last set, when you can't do any more complete range of motion reps, just try to squeeze out a couple of long length partials. So as I said, basically the tougher end. So you don't want to be squeezing out the easier end, don't want to be doing those short length ones, do the long length ones. And if you can get 2 or 3 more reps out, but you don't want, as I said, you don't want to be doing like your whole set at partials, just like, if you've got to 12 reps and then you just can't do any more at that full range of motion, but you might be able to squeeze out a couple more at the long length. Obviously the shorter length is going to be easier, but we're not here to do things easier. And by talking about the easier, I want you to kind of imagine, when you see people doing pull-ups or chin-ups, and you may have done this yourself too. So the full range of motion when you're doing a pull-up or chin-up is you start from a dead hang. So you're basically hanging with your arms fully straight, and then you're actually pulling your body up towards the bar, and then going back down to the dead hang position. So a lot of people they'll kind of like come down to the halfway position when their elbows are like kind of like still bent, and then continue with the next rep. So they're kind of doing these half rep things, because obviously the bottom half of that rep is tougher. So they're whether subconsciously or consciously actually trying to avoid that tougher part of the rep. So if you can think like if it's the tougher part of the rep, it's probably the long length. So that's the part you want to be aiming for. But once again, just do these for your last couple of reps, your last 2 or 3 reps of the set, and don't start your partials until you can no longer do any more full reps. So, going back to the bicep curl, don't kind of set yourself a number in your head saying, I'm going to do 10 full range of motion reps and then I'm going to do 3 more partials. The way to make this effective is to do as many as you can. Don't set a number to it, but just do as many as you can. And then when you can no longer do any full range of motion, then you do your partials. I think that's kind of a common kind of fault that many people fall into is setting a target number instead of like doing it until they can't do it anymore. So that's relevant for the drop sets as well. So with your drop set, instead of like setting a number of reps you want to do before you move on to um, the next weight down, you would continue until you can no longer lift any more at that weight, and then go straight to your next one. So don't kind of set that target number. Just let your muscles tell you when you can't do anymore. Don't let your brain tell you when you can't do anymore. Your muscles, they don't count reps. It's only your mind that counts reps. Your muscles they're just worried about the stress they're put under. So the third technique is pausing, and I was kind of reminded about this only about a week ago, how effective this can be. And pausing is really good if you haven't got a lot of weights, a lot of variation of weights. So if you've got home gym and you don't have, um, next weights up or a lot of weights to add more weight to it, pausing can be quite effective. So pausing is essentially so pausing in the down motion of the rep, pausing for a few seconds, maybe even longer, before um, before pushing that weight back up. So say for example on a bench press, um, you you bring the weight down towards your chest, and then you might pause there for a few seconds before pushing back up. So you're essentially holding that weight. Um, and a squat, if you paused at the bottom position of the squat and held that squat before pushing back up, that's going to be quite effective, surprisingly effective. So I was kind of reminded about this a week ago. I had a couple of kids in the gym. Um, I call them kids. To me, like when you get to your 50s, like anyone under 30, you generally call a kid. But yeah, I had a couple of younger people in the gym, and I was running through technique with them. So I was talking to them about the technique of a squat, and to demonstrate, I was doing a barbell front squat. I didn't have a lot of weight on there. I think I had an Olympic bar, which is 20 kilos, and I had a 5 kilo plate on each side. So only 30 kilos, not a really lot of weight for me. And I didn't do that many reps. I did a couple of sets, 2 sets, and I think I did about 6 or 7 because it was just for demonstration purposes. I wasn't, doing a workout myself. I was just demonstrating the exercise and kind of talking them through it, like the importance of, positioning of your feet and, um, how your knees should be over your toes. And I won't go too much in the squat technique in this podcast because I have talked about this in a previous podcast. But yeah, I was talking through the process. So I get down to the bottom of the squat. and I would pause and I would explain my feet position. I would explain my, my hip position, my torso position, key points to look out for and everything. So these probably, may have taken like at the bottom of each squat, probably took about, 8 to 12 seconds maybe to explain all this. So even though I wasn't lifting a lot of weight, I wasn't doing a lot of sets, a lot of reps. The next day, I was like a little bit sore, like surprisingly sore because I hadn't done a heavy workout. But then I realized, like, I was adding the pauses to this, to each rep. I was deliberately adding like some, you know, fairly long pauses. So I didn't have a lot of weight. Wasn't doing a lot of reps. I only did 2 sets, but obviously my muscles were working. So yeah, pauses definitely, and your pauses can work particularly well for compound exercises. So the last two methods I talked about, your drop sets and your long length partials, they're more suitable for your isolation exercises. But these pauses are quite effective and a lot safer to use for compound exercises. So another example of a compound exercise. So when I'm running a class and I'm getting people to do push-ups, um, so well, I'll get them to do push-ups to my count. So you can probably rip out quite a few push-ups if you do them quickly. But what I'll do is I'll say down, up, down, up. So they're actually doing the push-ups to my cadence. So it's kind of forcing them in a down position to hold that down position before pushing back up. So yeah, pauses is the third um, technique that I use quite often when I'm trying to get that little bit extra out of a set. And you might do, the pauses every rep, or you might do the pauses every fifth rep, or you might just, do your whole set at the usual cadence, and then when you're really fatigued at the last couple of reps, maybe add the pauses in there. Mix around with it, play around with it, see what works. No, there's no hard and fast rule. These are my kind of, I guess, my little hacks that I use. There's definitely other hacks out there that people use. Some are good, some not so good. I've seen people doing some pretty weird hacks in the gym that they may have heard from some TikTok thing or something, but you know that you look at the range of motion and the mechanics, and it's not going to be that effective. So if someone tells you another hack, don't just take their word for it if they're not, especially if they're not a fitness professional. Um, just because someone's got big biceps doesn't mean their their routine is the best routine. Them just because someone's got a six pack doesn't mean their ab routine is like the best, the be all and end all with um, ab routine. So just kind of do a bit of research, especially if they're just someone posting something on social media or something like that. But yeah, they're my three little techniques that I'll use to get the most out of a set, and I'll just go through them quickly once again. So you have your drop sets, which is essentially lifting a heavy weight, and when you can't do any more, go to immediately go to a lighter weight. Don't pause in between, and you might do that 2 or 3 times until you can no longer lift anymore, until you're shaking at, trying to lift a weight that's quite light for you. So the key principle with that is, pretty much try to get the zero pause between weights, so don't chew up time changing the weights. The little subset of that, the little sub tip of that, which technically isn't a drop set, but the concept is similar, is going like a weighted lift, to the body weight version of that straight away. So bench press to push up, or barbell squat to body weight squat. Once again, um, the principle is the same. You need to, really minimize that time in between, get that to almost zero. So that's the first tip, is the drop sets. Second one I use quite a bit is the long head partials. Once again, make sure most of your reps are full range of motion, and only start doing your long head ones, when you can no longer do any partials. Yeah, don't go setting that, I'm going to do 10 full ones and then 3 partials. Do full ones until you can no longer do any full ones. That's the way to get the most, work out of that muscle. And the third technique is to add pauses. So this is particularly effective with compound exercises, squats, bench press. You can use it for push-ups. Yeah, even body weight squats and things like that. At the down end of that exercise, so when your muscles are contracted, pause for a few seconds before pushing. This kind of like makes sure you're not using any momentum, but it also takes up a lot of kind of muscle. Your muscles are working hard to kind of keep you in that position before pushing into that next rep. This is also particularly effective if you have a limited range of weights that you can use. If you have a home gym, or even when like when we were all closed down with COVID, I was doing PT sessions outdoors when we were allowed to, and I'd bring a few weights, and I'd incorporate pauses into the workouts for the people I was training, because I didn't have a wide range of weights to progress them to. And there's a few ways you can add the pauses, as I said, and play around with this. Um, just because I do it one way doesn't mean another way wouldn't work. So you could kind of like towards the end of the set add a couple of pauses, or you can pause like every fifth rep, or you can pause for every rep if you wanted. Yeah, play around with it a bit, see what works. But essentially, what you're trying to do with every one of these techniques is to get everything out of that muscle. So at the end of the set, you're not leaving anything in the tank. You're getting the most out of it. So with each of the techniques I've talked about, the end goal is the same. You want there to be nothing left in the tank at the end of that set, particularly if it's your last set in in that particular exercise. You kind of like taking it to the wire. Um, Once again, take safety into account, which is kind of why or one of the reasons I don't recommend drop sets for big compound lifts like squats and bench press. But as I said, you can effectively achieve the same result by doing the comparable body weight exercise. So, bench press to push up. barbell squat to body weight squat. Yeah, like I've done bench presses where I've immediately racked the bar when I can't get any more reps out, but then rolled on the floor and smashed out, however many push-ups until basically my face is about to hit the ground because I can no longer do any more push-ups. So things like that, you're trying to take everything to the wire because at the end of your workout, it's those last few reps where your muscle is really, really struggling to get those last couple of reps out. Those last couple of reps is what's going to make the difference. All the other reps, the reps you're finding are easy, are just business as usual for your muscles. If you did 10 reps or something, and at the end of that set of 10 reps, your muscles aren't really struggling, not fatigued, that is business as usual. So these little tips, um, kind of, they're kind of pushing that muscle to the wire. There's just one more thing I want to add here, and I kind of want to get everyone out of the habit of this is stop counting. And what I mean by stop counting is don't do a predetermined number of reps per set. Let your muscles decide when they've had enough. Don't let your head decide. And this is kind of it's one of those things where people have had ingrained for years and years, for decades, 2, 3 sets of 10. But counting is kind of counting your reps. Nothing wrong with counting your reps. What I mean is don't do a predetermined number of reps. Don't say, hey, I'm going to do 10 of this. Hey, I'm going to do, however many. Let your muscles decide when that set is finished. An example of this is, some of you may have heard this story. Muhammad Ali, the boxer Muhammad Ali, he was in his dressing room doing sit-ups, and a reporter walks in, and the reporter says, how many sit-ups do you do? And Ali says, I don't know because I don't start counting until it starts hurting. So, same principle. Just go until you can't do it anymore. Obviously, take safety into consideration, but yeah, it's kind of one of the things I'm trying to, as a personal trainer, get people out of the habit of is counting their reps. I want them to take everything until they can't do anymore. They do that little bit extra, because it's those couple of reps at the end where you're really under tension. They're the ones that are going to make the difference. So there you go. They're my 3 little hacks how to get the most out of every set. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Once again, if you haven't already, follow this channel, please. I'd like to see more followers. I'd like to see more numbers on that follow thing. Share with friends. If you think they're going to get some benefit out of this, share. If you haven't listened, if you're a first-time listener to this podcast, welcome. Thank you for listening. But go back through my previous episodes. This one's about running. This one's about lifting weights. There's even one about the cable toss. So check that one out if you haven't already. This is my 2nd year of doing that podcast, so there's probably about, I don't know, I think I'm nearly up to about 50 episodes, I think, by now. So if you haven't, listened to them all, go back and check out the ones you haven't listened to. So guys, thanks again for listening. I will talk to you next time. Bye.